I used to get taken around to all the different university courses all the time, and being pushed. Girls can do anything. Girls are, can do engineering, and they can do, medicine, law, whatever it is. But every time I went around and I looked, nothing really grabbed me. But there was this one place where they were doing design, and they were focusing on environments and creating these beautiful plans that were sort of connecting to sort of natural flows. And I thought, oh wow, that looks interesting. Anyway, when I started looking at what I wanted to do at the end of school, I remember my dad always talking about permaculture. Actually, ever since it came out in the 70s. So I was still in late primary school, early high school. So I'd always heard this term and always talked about with great fondness. So I kind of, it was in there all the time, and the ethics and the approach. We grew things at home, not a huge amount, but we always had gardens and fruit trees and often chickens, but always native plants and attracting wildlife. So there was this kind of regenerative approach all the time at home, and Mum was always making sure that there was food that was sort of no sugar, it was mostly organic, I would think, and that we had no coffee or tea or salt or anything like that. It was just natural, basic foods, and all vegetarian. And so I grew up with this understanding and awareness of the value of living simply. I grew up in the suburbs of Melbourne, so it wasn't kind of like a really unusual place, but something about there had such a strong community, a really strong connection to place, and something about landscape architecture and being able to create and design. I don't know why that in particular grabbed me. I think because it was about solution finding. It was actually about finding, there was issues that I was really concerned about in the world, environmental issues and social issues, and landscape architecture and environmental planning was a combined thing. It gave me a chance to actually be the change. Actually, there was this saying, if you're not looking for a solution, then you're part of the problem, which was, I think I saw this slogan somewhere, and I was like, yeah, it's something that this gives me a chance to actually create positive solutions. Anyway, so landscape architecture became my world, and it was during that I discovered all these amazing thinkers, and just started to really focus on permaculture. But it wasn't that activated me. It was way before then. I remember feeling completely devastated by all the nuclear conflict, the talk about nuclear, the mutually assured destruction, that program that was around in the 80s, and it terrified me, absolutely terrified me. I was like, what are people doing? Why are we living in a world where we're having to control each other by fear and threat? And as a teenager, it just was something that I just really felt. And I think it's probably a little bit like what the teenagers are feeling now with the climate strikes. Yesterday, 1.5 million students went out and marched on the streets. I was kind of part of the last wave of students that were marching out in the streets about peace. There was peace marches all the time, and there was also environmental marches for everything from the stopping the damming of the Franklin River, and the other one that really stuck in my mind was all the dust just kind of coming off the farmland and landing itself on Melbourne, and Melbourne going into darkness in the mid-80s, and just thinking after that, something's got to shift. The way we're working, we're destroying the land, we're living in fear. And I remember also, even younger, as a primary school kid, we were being taught about waste and recycling, and I couldn't believe how much waste people were creating. I remember going home and I was trying to, talk to my parents, who were very aware anyway about how we could reduce the waste in the household. So somehow inside of me all the time was this sense of, it wasn't not duty, but a sense of caring and responsibility that it's up to us. if we don't do it, then who is going to do it? And it's not about feeling disabled by being just an individual, that everything that everyone does counts, and the way you live your life and how you interact with other people and how it's walking your talk. And I guess I was inspired by seeing other people do that, and I thought, yeah, you can make a difference. Everyone can make a difference. And as a young kid, I felt really empowered by that, and so I just kept doing it. So how did I get to the permaculture course? Well, I was talking about those inspiring people that I started to come across it when I was at uni, and I kind of sought them out. I was getting a little bit bored, I have to say, at uni. The landscape architecture ended up being a little bit disappointing. It was more about designing fancy landscapes for people who had lots of money rather than actually creating solutions to the world's problem. And I remember actually doing this project once saying, the underlying thinking of all of my design here is about designing with nature, and I got told, oh, that's a bit passé. So it was a type of design theory or a fad that one should now put in the past, and we go postmodernism, blah-de-blah. And I just went, oh, now that, So I found the people that I thought were talking the language that I was interested in, and I went and found them. And I found them at a place called Schumacher College, which actually I'm going to next week, and I'm going to be teaching there in a course. So I'm really, really over the moon to be able to have been a student there in the 90s, in the early 90s. I spent about a year all up at Schumacher, and then I've been back there to teach a couple of times now, and that kind of feels just a wonderful thing. So anyway, I went to seek people there, and I came across a woman called Helena Norberg Hodge, and she spoke about these people in Ladakh who were living a sustainable culture. And her really big point was about how Western culture impacts cultures like that, and how by that intersection between, new life and some new ways of living and traditional ways of living, that it unravels the traditional ways of living. But what struck me was about how she was saying these people lived really simply with no money, but lived a very rich and happy life. And it sounded to me like she was talking about what a sustainable society. And because I always understood what sustainability meant and sort of certain actions, but what did a whole society look like that was living sustainably? Like, what did that mean? And so I went there. I went up, and I actually went up to her and said, look, I would love to volunteer with you. Can I come and volunteer in Ladakh? And so I did. I headed up there for that summer, and I was meant to be back home, back at university. Actually, I never got back to university. I never finished that master's program. I headed off and did life schooling, which, by the way, is amazing. Far better, I think. So I ended up in Ladakh, and I was there, and it was, I guess, the turning point of my understanding, and it's the experience that has shaped everything that I do today. Living with the Ladakhi people, experiencing what it meant to really live a sustainable life, and to see really clearly mirrored our own culture. The wastefulness, the consumerism, the vanity, all of those things, which actually meant nothing in the bigger picture. Whereas this happy, beautiful, aesthetically gorgeous, productive place where people had, everything was kind of connected. Communities were connected, communities connected each other with their place, with their, they were well aware of their sort of spiritual selves as well as their practical selves. And it was this integrated whole, and there was no, okay, now we go to work, and now we're having time off, and everything was connected. There was this life-work balance. There's also connectedness between generations. So there was no kind of, okay, well, the 5-year-olds go here, or the 6-year-olds go there, and if you're middle-aged, you go here, and if you're old there. Like, there was this spectrum. Everyone was involved in everything, and the wisdom of the elders was shared directly with the younger people, and things were learnt in context. So if you learnt about building and design, you were learning it by building and designing a house, not by having an abstracted, schooling about that, and then getting out of school and going, oh, actually, I know how to design a house, but I actually don't know how to build it. And this is this disconnection we have with much of what we do. We sort of intellectualise everything, but we actually have no practical skills. So Ladakh transformed that, and it transformed my heart, because all of a sudden I felt like, oh, I get it now. I really get it. So when I came back to Australia, I started thinking, well, how can I apply this here? And that's when I discovered that I really needed to go and do that permaculture course that I'd been looking at all those years. And it was at that permaculture course that I met Evan, and from that moment on, we've been together. So I went back to Melbourne. So I came and did the permaculture course at Crystal Waters, and so I was living in Melbourne at the time. So I came up for the 2-week course, and at the end of the 2-week course, I went back home. I think I was back up here within 2 weeks, and then hung out with Evan, and then I went back to Melbourne and went, oh, no, that's it. I'm moving up here. Within a day or so of moving to Queensland, I found a couple of people who were starting to talk about creating a city farm in the middle of Brisbane, and so I got sort of joined up with that group, and that was the formation of the Northey Street City Farm, which was really a way to, get this way of thinking and community and connection and food growing and sustainable thinking on the ground, and to experiment with it and to try out all these ideas. And we had everything from study circles to food groups to kids groups to anything that the community was looking for was being served through there. So it was this whole process of the community meeting its own needs in public space. So it was a recommoning project. It was actually about shifting from a consumer way of life to a privately owned way of life, to a space where we all, work together to meet what it was that we needed, and to create a sense of connection and belonging. And so I started teaching from there, basically. We were sharing stories about Ladakh, we were sharing stories about permaculture, about community, and so just naturally started falling into being a teacher there. But I had a few little jobs. I would kind of work even though I had a university degree, I wasn't physically using that in a professional capacity at that time. So I was using those skills to cultivate these projects, which, now looking back, I can see the value of that. It's an amazing project right in the heart of Brisbane that ripples and touches thousands of people's lives every week. And so it is, of course, an amazing project, but it wasn't done as okay, I'm commissioned to design a project. It was actually a flip of that, following a need and an interest and a passion. And I think that's kind of what I've always tried to do. A couple of times I've kind of veered from that. So after doing that for a while, and I was working in a food cooperative and a lot of other different things, came across... Hello. There was this program called the Green Jobs Program, and so Evan and I both joined up together and got a real job in the government, doing government things like environmental planning and environmental... What was your thing called, Ev? What was your compliance? Making sure that people were complying with the rules of the environmental laws, and I was assessing the suitability of mobile towers and whether it was okay to sort of chop some forest there, or whether the habitat clearing was going to... So, it was all kind of valuable work, but it just didn't float my boat. I just felt empty. I felt dead inside. I couldn't wait to get out. So that was my one and only ever attempt at having a real job. And I hated it. Absolutely hated it. And Evan hated it too. And so we decided then that we weren't going to do that anymore. And we visioned our route out, which was basically saving as much money as we could, living super simply. Like back then we just ate very simply. Well, we still do. We rode our bikes everywhere. We were in a share house. We were young. We were sort of 20-something. And so we saved up all our money and went back to Ladakh and India and spent almost a year travelling and experiencing different eco-village projects, sustainable community projects and different cultures, and came back and then threw ourselves back into the City Farm project and helping to set up the Australian City Farms and Community Gardens Network and running local events like the Green Fair, which had 4,000 people coming through City Farm, and really trying to ripple out the story and realising that was an amazing platform. And so it was kind of after doing that for some time that we then got an invitation to come and start teaching permaculture at Crystal Waters. And so everything just kind of aligned at that time. We were invited to come and be the new teachers of permaculture at Crystal Waters. Evan's mum had just done a permaculture course in Brisbane and decided to buy a house here. She was thinking of moving, but so we got to kind of be the caretakers of that house while she was deciding what to do. And a piece of land came up available that we were able to buy, and my dad had just retired, so he did a sort of an ethical investment with us, and we paid him back over time with a no interest loan, so we got our piece of land here. And then over time we just started developing and building our place here, and we've done it slowly because we were running permaculture courses here, and every time someone would come, people would come and do permaculture courses here from all around the world, and they would come and go, "This is fantastic, I love what's going on, I love what you're sharing, can you come and teach it in Indonesia or wherever?" And so we started this journey, and then there was one major journey that we did. We wanted to go and explore eco-villages around the world. We wanted to see what was happening in other places, what were other kind of systems, what were other communities doing about their decision-making, about their physical setup, so that we could, this was our school of life. We wanted to become experts. So whenever we decide that we want to learn something more, we go to the source and find out what we know, what they know, so we can kind of share that out further. And so we headed off on this journey around the world. I think we had, I don't know, that might have been the time before. I'm getting my times mixed up. But anyway, we headed off on a 9-month journey around the world with $500 in our pocket. We had our tickets and we had some points along the way. And so we basically went around, and in exchange for food and accommodation, we would maybe give a talk, do a workshop, or interact in some way, and then we would move on to the next place. And it was a phenomenal way to travel. It was just the most educational thing that we'd ever done. I'm now the permaculture and new economy editor of the New Economy Journal, and so starting to share some of the stories about how living your life through a different economic perspective can be so rewarding, so enriching, and actually create a wealth of experience and a wealth in your life, and abundance, but without actually the dollars. And so I think that's a really important lesson, particularly for a lot of young people. And I'm kind of feeling now that a lot of those 1.5 million students who were striking on Friday, and the ones who were not striking but are totally online with it all, are going to get to the point very soon and go, okay, so we don't want that, but what is it that we do want? And that's exactly the questions that I've been searching for my whole life. So if it's not that destructive life, it's not that life that causes great big dust storms, if it's not that life that undermines community, if it's not that life which, creates just devastation and war and conflict and all of that, what is the life? What does it look like? And I think that they're going to start asking that question pretty soon. And I'm feeling that permaculture is a really key solution that we can offer very easily, because it's, you know, through an immersion process. It's like it's a flip in thinking. It's a flip from, you know, okay, you go to school, you go to university, you get your job, you buy your house, you have your kids, you know, and then you retire, and then you live on your retirement money. There's this process, and that's not so very true for many people. It's a kind of a linear process, and there's so much angst and struggle and, you know, unhappiness that goes through that, and sickness. And so what are the other ways of living? What are the other ways of existing in this world that are regenerative of our environment and ourselves and our cultures? And so that's where I think those who are now questioning, this massive amounts of young students are questioning, are looking not only for a different politics, but a different society and different culture and a different form of education. And that's kind of where I feel what I've got to offer now, having been in this for 25 years and brought it together in something that can be transferred and be a way of life and a way of living and a way of sharing this, so that you can have a sustainable way of life, and so you have a lifestyle and a livelihood that's based on these ethics really strongly, that are helping to create these positive changes that we want to see in the world. And that's what this is all about.